सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Eyes closed, it's possible to imagine the inelegantly designed 10-storied towers clustered off the Sare Sabzi in Kabul as the kernels of Shanghai's business district rising from a great river of light. True, the bright red signs on the buildings invoking President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative is rarely illuminated. But Chinatown's plans to build a dedicated power station were derailed by the war. The plant it is being promised will come up soon, together with an industrial park, factories and offices. A year ago this week, as the Islamic Emirates flag rose over Kabul and the last American evacuation flights left the city, many feared the new Taliban regime would unleash terror across the region by providing safe havens to its transnational jihadist partners. Foreign ministry officials in Beijing also exulted as the United States was evicted from Afghanistan. To them, the rise of China as the regional hegemon in Central Asia, with no competing great power to contain its ambitions, now seems certain. Islamabad, they believed, would work with the Taliban to end violence and rein in terrorists. Then, a tidal wave of mining and infrastructure projects would be unleashed, locking Afghanistan into a new Chinese-led order. Yu Minghui, Chinatown's founder, had refused to leave Kabul when the city fell to the Taliban. "We don't want to give local people the impression that us Chinese are unreliable and will escape at the first sight of trouble," he said in an interview. But things aren't quite running to China's plan. Afghanistan remains awash in violence inflicted by competing jihadist groups. And that makes the dream impossible to realize. Lithium, the soft, silvery white metal that is powering the transformation of the world's transport sector out of hydrocarbon dependence, was supposed to help write the new Afghanistan story. The Pentagon in 2010 had announced that Afghanistan had a staggering $1 trillion in locked up mineral resources. Ghazni was predicted to become the Saudi Arabia of lithium, ahead of Bolivia. Elsewhere, it was said, lay enormous veins of rare earths and great mountains of iron, copper, cobalt and gold. Frick Els was among a handful of experts who even then was skeptical of the hype. For one, the purportedly new discoveries had in fact been made and published by Soviet geologists 3 decades earlier. The new United States Geological Survey studies, moreover, estimated, and I quote, "quantitative probabilistic estimates of undiscovered deposits, not actual extractable resources." Like in the Soviet era, years of on-ground prospecting and the development of infrastructure like roads and railway lines to carry mined resources to markets were needed before the hype could be realized. In troubled Afghanistan, these were not small things. India was among the countries that had drawn up plans centered around Afghanistan's mineral resources. It planned to mine iron oxide deposits in Hajigak, which it hoped to link through a $150 million railway network to bauxite and urea industries in Iran, and eventually on to the $85 million port at Chabahar. The realities of conflict in Afghanistan and sanctions directed at Iran's nuclear program basically killed the project. Fraud allegations also surfaced as the United States unleashed $500 million in a push to exploit Afghanistan's fabled mineral resources. Funds for some attractive projects were simply embezzled. Centaur, which had promised 13,000 jobs and $1 billion in revenue from its planned gold operations in Badakhshan, could never even begin work. China's grand plans also went nowhere. In 2007, state-owned China Metallurgical Group won the right to extract copper from Mess Aynak in Logar. China Metallurgical was to have invested some $3 billion eventually, including the construction of a railway to Torkham in Pakistan and a dedicated power plant. Even though $371 million is estimated to have been spent by the Chinese, there is nothing to mark the Mess Aynak site except some barbed wire and a few boards. Fabled as Afghanistan's mineral wealth might be, mining corporations know there are other, safer places where similar treasure is to be found. China itself has already made large investments in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, which are home to more than half the world's exploitable lithium reserves. Ganfeng Lithium is the largest stakeholder in Argentina's lithium fields, the largest new brine reserves found in decades. Tianqi Lithium owns a quarter of the world's largest lithium producer. Even though Afghanistan is physically closer to China than Latin America, expensive road and rail infrastructure will first have to be built to make those operations workable. Chinese companies can more easily acquire critical minerals from alternative sources, scholars Matthew Funianol and Brian Hartwright, and they know well the risks and headaches that come with doing business in Afghanistan. The Bayan Obo mining complex in Inner Mongolia, moreover, holds more than 48 million metric tons of rare earths, a vastly larger reserve than Khan Nashin in Afghanistan, where there is estimated to be just 1.3 million metric tons. Islamic Emirate leaders, having ruptured their relationship with the Western donors who provided the equivalent of 43% of the country's GDP and funded 75% of its public expenditure, desperately need cash. In the build-up to 2020, scholar Kate Clark has noted, the Taliban raised revenue by taxing residents in areas under their control, as well as illegal mining and narcotics operations. Finance for the government, though, was paid entirely by the Afghan state and its foreign donors, and obviously that's now dried up. The Islamic Emirate then needs cash fast. To get it though, it'll have to first build a credible state structure, and that seems a pretty distant reach. Elsewhere in the region, China has shown willingness to pump in money to stabilize strategically important neighbors. Exim Bank, China's state-owned giant, loaned some $70 million to build Tajikistan's Vandat-Yovan railway in 2014 and another $290 million to construct a high-altitude road from Chanak to the capital Dushanbe. The work was undertaken by Chinese engineering firms using Chinese workers. This meant that while a large part of finance went back to that country, a thoughtful EurasiaNet analysis has noted, the debt stayed on in Tajikistan. Tajikistan, which was torn apart by a savage civil war from 1992 to 1997, continues to be at threat from jihadist groups. For China, that jihadist threat, coming in the main from insurgents linked to the Islamic State, holds out the risk of spilling eastwards into its borders. Tying a volatile neighbor to itself through BRI projects makes strategic sense. Like in Sri Lanka though, the price of not repaying has been pretty high for Tajikistan. In 2017, when it failed to return a $330 million loan for the construction of a power plant in Dushanbe, Tajikistan was forced to hand over concessions to its Upper Kumarg and Eastern Duoba gold mines to the Chinese company. Kashgar Zinyu Dadi Mining Investment, another Chinese mining firm, has been given a long-term exemption from taxes and customs duties. In addition, Tajikistan has been forced to cede significant territories to China in controversial border deals, which critics argue are one-sided. An estimated 60% of the $3.3 billion that Tajikistan owes its foreign creditors come from that single state-run bank, Exim Bank, roughly 3 times the ratio in Sri Lanka. Likely, China would be happy to throw money at the Islamic Emirate to lock it into similar arrangements. But the case of the mining sector shows there's one catch. Afghanistan remains in a state of endemic lawlessness, where delivering on projects is near impossible. Islamabad was to have delivered the keys to the new Afghanistan by pushing its Taliban clients into power-sharing agreements that would stabilize the polity. Instead, the two main Afghan Taliban factions, led by the jihadists of Kandahar and their competitors, the Haqqani network, remain in conflict. There's a large pool of young, prospectless jihadists who fought with the Taliban but are now seeking new opportunities with groups like the Islamic State. And inside Pakistan itself, the factional struggles of the Afghan Taliban have facilitated the growth of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Like the United States and the Soviet Union before it, China will probably discover the grand plans of great powers don't survive contact with the hostile soil in Afghanistan. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm National Security Editor of The Print.